The sun beat down like a hammer on an anvil. Elizabeth Morgan stood on a wooden platform, her hands trembling despite her efforts to still them. 56 years old, and here she was, being auctioned off like livestock. Do I hear $15? 15 for 3 months' labor. The auctioneer's voice cut through the desert air. Men in dusty coats laughed, made crude jokes about what an old woman was good for. Elizabeth kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, refusing to let them see her break. But then she made the mistake of looking down. Thomas stood there in the crowd. Her son, 28 years old, the boy she'd raised alone after his father abandoned them. The boy she'd worked her fingers bloody for. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Mama, I'm sorry," he'd said that morning, his voice hollow. "The gambling debts. They'll kill me if I don't pay. You understand, don't you?" She had understood. She understood that she'd somehow raised a coward. 15. Going once. That's when she heard it. A different sound cutting through the crowd. Not laughter, but the irregular rhythm of boots on packed earth. Thump drag, thump drag. A man pushed through the crowd. Tall, lean, with a beard that had gone more gray than brown. He walked with a crutch, his left pant leg pinned up where his leg should have been. "Stop this," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a man who'd commanded work crews on the railroad. The auctioneer paused. "Mr. Collins, you bidding?" "No." Nathan Collins stepped up to the platform and did something no one expected. He tore the contract paper in half. "This woman isn't property. The choice belongs to her." He turned to Elizabeth, and for the first time in months, someone looked at her like she was a human being. "Ma'am, I have a vineyard that needs work. Real work with real wages. If you want it, the job is yours. And if you don't, I'll drive you anywhere you want to go. But nobody sells you today." In the stunned silence that followed, Elizabeth Morgan felt something she thought had died: hope.
Every story deserves to be heard. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Your voice keeps the past alive.
3 months earlier, Elizabeth had still believed in the possibility of tomorrow. She stood in the kitchen of the small farmhouse she'd called home for 30 years, kneading bread dough with methodical precision. The morning light through the window was soft, golden. Outside, their 2 remaining chickens pecked at the hard earth, searching for seeds that didn't exist. The drought had entered its 3rd year. Wells ran dry. Crops failed. Neighbors packed up and left in the night, abandoning homesteads to the dust and wind. But Elizabeth had stayed because this was her land, the only thing she'd ever owned. "Mama." She looked up. Thomas stood in the doorway, hat in hand. 28 years old and still boyish in the face, though something in his eyes had hardened over the past year. "I need to talk to you about the money." Elizabeth's hands stilled in the dough. "What money?" "The money I borrowed. From Mr. Brennan's men." Her stomach dropped. "Thomas, you didn't." "I thought I could win it back, Mama. I really did. But the cards, they just—" "How much?" His silence was answer enough. Elizabeth pulled her hands from the dough, wiped them on her apron. "We'll sell the chickens. The wagon. I have some jewelry from your grandmother. It's $200, Mama." The number hung in the air like an executioner's blade. $200. They didn't have 20. They said. Thomas couldn't look at her. "They said there's a way. A labor contract. Just for a few months. They'll forgive the whole debt if—" "No." The word came out flat, final. "Mama, they'll kill me." "Then you should have thought of that before you gambled away money you didn't have." She regretted the words immediately. Thomas flinched like she'd struck him, and suddenly she saw him as he'd been at 8 years old, crying because the other boys had laughed at his patched trousers. Elizabeth softened her voice. "We'll find another way, Tommy. We always do." But they didn't find another way. The men came a week later. 3 of them, dressed in suits too fine for the desert, working for Silas Brennan, the man who owned half the territory and wanted the other half. "Mrs. Morgan, we're here about your son's debt." They were polite, professional. They explained the contract clearly. 3 months of labor, assigned to whoever paid the contract fee. Room and board provided. The debt would be settled, Thomas would be safe. "You're old enough that the heavy work won't kill you," one of them said with a smile. "And honestly, ma'am, what other options do you have?" She looked at Thomas. Her boy, pale and shaking, unable to meet her eyes. What other options did she have? The contract yard sat on the edge of town, a barren stretch of dirt where the desperate gathered. Elizabeth had passed it before, always looking away, pretending not to see the people standing there with signs around their necks listing their skills. Cook, seamstress, farmhand. Now she stood among them. The other contract laborers were mostly younger. Men in their 20s who'd lost everything to drink or cards or bad luck, women whose husbands had died leaving nothing but debts. They looked at Elizabeth with a mixture of pity and contempt. At 56, with gray in her hair and arthritis starting in her hands, she knew what they were thinking. What's she good for? The auctioneer arrived at noon, a florid man named Jessup who ran these contract assignments twice a month. He set up his podium, arranged his papers, called for the buyers to gather. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have some fine workers today. Strong backs, willing hands, all legally contracted and available for immediate assignment." Elizabeth's hands trembled. She folded them in front of her, forced herself to stand straight. Her mother had been a proud woman, had taught Elizabeth that dignity was something nobody could take from you. But standing here, being evaluated like a horse at auction, she wondered if her mother had been wrong. The younger workers went first. A muscular man in his 30s went for $40, 3 months to work a lumber operation. A woman who claimed to be an expert cook was snapped up by a hotel owner. The crowd thinned as the sun climbed higher. Then it was Elizabeth's turn. Next we have Mrs. Elizabeth Morgan, age 56. Experienced in household management, sewing, basic farming. Good health for her age. Good health for her age. Like she was a milk cow past her prime. "Let's start the bidding at $10 for 3 months. Do I hear 10? Silence. Elizabeth's cheeks burned. Even at rock bottom, she wasn't worth $10. "Come now, gentlemen, that's barely $1 a week. Surely someone needs a housekeeper. What's she going to keep house with? She can barely keep herself standing." Someone in the crowd laughed. Others joined in. "How about $5? 5 for 3 months. A rancher near the front spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "I'd pay 5 not to have to feed her." More laughter. Elizabeth felt something cracking inside her chest. Some foundation she'd built her life on crumbling to dust. This was what she'd been reduced to. This was the end of 30 years of hard work, of raising a son alone, of surviving when everyone said she wouldn't. This was her reward. $5 going once. And that's when she heard it. Thump drag, thump drag. The crowd parted. A man came through, moving with the awkward but determined gait of someone who'd learned to walk again after losing part of himself. He was tall, probably 45 or 50, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent years outdoors. Gray threaded through his dark beard. His left leg was gone from just below the knee. But it was his eyes that struck Elizabeth, storm gray, intense, seeing her rather than through her. "Stop this," he said. Jessup the auctioneer paused mid-sentence. "Mr. Collins, are you bidding?" "No. I'm stopping this obscenity." Nathan Collins stepped up onto the platform, moving with surprising grace despite the crutch. He reached for the contract paper in Jessup's hand and, before anyone could react, tore it cleanly in half. "Hey, that's legal property. This woman," Nathan said, his voice carrying across the yard, "is not property. She never was. These contracts are barely legal, morally reprehensible, and I won't see them used in this town anymore." He turned to Elizabeth. Up close, she could see the scars on his hands. Old burns, the kind you got working with metal and machinery. A railroad man's hands. "Ma'am, I don't know you and you don't know me. But I have a vineyard about 5 miles north of here that's going to seed because I can't manage it alone. I need someone who knows hard work, who won't quit when things get difficult, who understands what it means to build something. The job pays real wages, $30 a month, room and board. If you want it, it's yours. Elizabeth stared at him. This had to be some kind of trick, some new cruelty she hadn't anticipated. And if I don't want it, then I'll drive you anywhere you need to go. But either way, nobody sells you today. The crowd had gone silent. Jessup sputtered, threatened legal action, but Nathan ignored him. He kept his eyes on Elizabeth, waiting. She thought about her son, about the house she'd lost, about the years of her life spent making do with nothing. She thought about dignity and choice, and the fact that for the first time in months, someone was offering her both. Why? The word came out barely above a whisper. Why would you do this? Something flickered across Nathan Collins' face. Old pain, carefully controlled. Because 7 years ago, when I lost my leg in a railroad accident, my company tried to auction off my tools to pay for my care. Friend stopped them. Tore up the paperwork, same as I just did. Gave me a chance to find out I could still be worth something. I'm just returning the favor. He extended his hand. Not to pull her off the platform, but as an equal offering a deal. So what do you say, Mrs. Morgan? Want to help me save a vineyard? Elizabeth looked at his hand. Scarred, calloused, steady. Then she looked out at the crowd, at the men who'd laughed at her, at Thomas standing in the back, shamefaced and small. She took Nathan Collins' hand. I'll take the job. The vineyard was 5 miles north, but Nathan took the long way, following the ridge road where the view opened up to show the valley below. He drove the wagon with practiced ease, compensating for his missing leg with unconscious adjustments to his balance. Elizabeth sat beside him, her small bag of belongings at her feet. Everything she owned in the world fit in a canvas sack. 2 dresses, a shawl, her mother's Bible, a photograph of Thomas as a baby. The weight of such a small life pressed against her chest. You're wondering if you made a mistake, Nathan said. It wasn't a question. I'm wondering why you made the offer. I told you. You told me a reason. I'm asking for the truth. Nathan's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. You don't waste time, do you? At my age, Mr. Collins, time is the only thing I can't afford to waste. He was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the road ahead. The horse, a sturdy mare named Patience, plodded on with the resigned determination of an animal that had made this journey many times. My wife died 3 years ago, Nathan said finally. Cancer. Took her slow, gave her time to make me promise things. One of them was that I wouldn't let the vineyard die with her. It was her father's, passed down to her, and she loved it like some people love children. He shifted his weight, adjusting his crutch. But I'm a railroad man, Mrs. Morgan. Or I was. I know iron and steam and how to drive a tunnel through solid rock. I don't know grapevines. And working alone with one leg. He trailed off. Let's just say I've learned the limits of pride. And you think I can help? I've never grown grapes in my life. No, but you've survived. That counts for more than experience. They crested a hill, and the vineyard spread out before them. It was heartbreaking and beautiful in equal measure. Rows of grapevines stretched across 20 acres, the posts still standing but many of the vines overgrown or dying. A stone house sat at the center, small but solid, with a wide porch that had been built to catch the evening breeze. A barn leaned to one side, and various outbuildings dotted the property in various states of disrepair. But underneath the neglect, Elizabeth could see the bones of something good. The soil, though dry, had the right color. The vines that still lived showed signs of careful cultivation. Water tanks had been positioned to catch what little rain fell. Someone had built this place with love. It's not much anymore, Nathan said, and she heard the apology in his voice. It's a place to start, Elizabeth replied. Nathan's house was spare but clean. The main room served as kitchen and living space, with a wood stove against one wall and a table that had been built for a family that never came. 2 bedrooms led off the main room, one clearly Nathan's, the other closed. That was Mary's room, he said, nodding toward the closed door. My wife's. I haven't. Keep it for guests. There's a bed, clean sheets. It locks from the inside. He said this last part firmly, meeting her eyes. Establishing a boundary, making a promise. I don't expect anything from you except honest work, Mrs. Morgan. You'll have privacy, respect, and wages paid at the end of every month. If at any point you want to leave, I'll drive you wherever you want to go, no questions asked. Is that clear? Elizabeth felt something unclench in her chest. It's clear. Good. Now are you hungry? I make terrible coffee but decent bacon. They ate in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the vineyard in shades of gold and amber. Nathan moved around his kitchen with the efficiency of a man who'd learned to adapt, using the counter for balance, keeping his crutch close. He didn't apologize for his leg or make excuses for what he couldn't do. He simply did what he could and worked around the rest. Elizabeth found herself relaxing in a way she hadn't in years. There was no tension here, no walking on eggshells, no wondering when the next crisis would hit. Just the simple rhythm of a meal shared between two people who'd both learned that life wasn't kind but could occasionally be bearable. Tell me about the vineyard, she said. What needs doing first? Nathan poured more coffee. He was right, it was terrible, and leaned back in his chair. Everything. But if I had to prioritize, we need to identify which vines are salvageable and which need to be pulled. Then we need to repair the irrigation system before the winter rains, assuming we get any. The fences are falling down, which means deer are getting in. And the barn roof needs patching before it collapses entirely. That's more than two people can manage in a season. I know. He met her eyes. But we can make a start. And maybe next year, if we can coax a harvest out of these old vines, we'll have money to hire more help. Or maybe we'll fail and lose the whole thing. Either way, at least we'll have tried. There was something in his voice, a bone-deep weariness mixed with stubborn determination. This was a man who'd lost too much to give up easily, but had lost enough to know that trying wasn't always enough. Elizabeth understood that feeling intimately. When do we start? She asked. Dawn. I'll show you the property, teach you what I know about the vines. You'll probably be better at it than me inside a week. I doubt that. Mrs. Morgan, you raised a child alone during a drought. You kept a farm running with no husband and no help. You survived being put on an auction block and came out the other side. Don't sell yourself short. His words hit harder than she expected. When was the last time someone had acknowledged what she'd done, rather than what she'd failed to do? Thank you, she said quietly. And please call me Elizabeth. Elizabeth, then. And I'm Nathan. He stood, reaching for his crutch. I'll let you get settled. Morning comes early. He paused at the door to his room. Elizabeth, what you did today, taking a chance on a stranger, choosing to start over, that took courage. I want you to know that. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Elizabeth sat alone in the quiet house, her terrible coffee cooling in its cup. Through the window, she could see the vineyard stretching out under the stars, row upon row of vines waiting for someone to care for them again. She thought about Thomas, about the house she'd lost, about all the ways life had beaten her down. Then she thought about Nathan's words. Don't sell yourself short. Maybe she wouldn't. Maybe, at 56 years old, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a job that paid $30 a month, maybe she could still build something worth having. The desert night was cold, but inside the stone house, Elizabeth Morgan felt warm for the first time in years. Elizabeth woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and, for a disorienting moment, couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back, the auction block, Nathan Collins, the vineyard. A choice made that could be a salvation or just another disappointment. She rose, dressed in her work dress, the sturdy one she'd worn for farm chores, now one of only two she owned, and stepped out of Mary's room into the main living area. Nathan was already up, standing at the stove frying eggs with the focused concentration of a man who'd taught himself to cook out of necessity rather than interest. He'd rolled up his shirt sleeves, and Elizabeth could see more scars on his forearms, the permanent marks of a railroad man's life. "Coffee's on the table," he said without turning around. "It hasn't improved overnight." Despite everything, Elizabeth smiled. "I'll survive." They ate breakfast in the growing light, and Nathan laid out his plan for the day. He'd walk her through the vineyard, show her which vines were producing and which were dying, explain the irrigation system such as it was. Then they'd start the sorting, save what could be saved, clear out what couldn't. "It's going to be hard work," he warned. "Harder than you might expect. If at any point you want to reconsider." "Mr. Collins, Nathan, I didn't survive the last 30 years by being afraid of hard work." He nodded, satisfied. "Then let's get started." The vineyard in daylight was both more beautiful and more damaged than Elizabeth had realized. The posts stood in neat rows, testament to careful planning, but many of the vines had grown wild, sending out runners that choked neighboring plants. Others had died entirely, leaving bare posts standing like grave markers. Nathan moved through the rows with surprising grace, his crutch finding purchase on the uneven ground. He'd stop at each vine, running his scarred hands over the wood, checking for new growth, assessing what could be salvaged. "Mary's father planted these 30 years ago," he explained. "Brought the cuttings from France, would you believe? Said California soil was perfect for wine grapes if you could just get enough water to them." He was right, but he didn't count on a drought this bad. He showed her how to tell a healthy vine from a dying one, the color of the wood, the flexibility of the branches, the presence of new buds. His hands, so scarred and rough, moved over the plants with gentleness that surprised her. "You really loved her," Elizabeth said quietly. "Your wife." Nathan's hands stilled on the vine. "I did. But not at first." He looked up at the sky, squinting against the sun. "I was 37 when we met, angry at the world for taking my leg, drinking too much, driving everyone away. She hired me to fix her barn roof, the same barn that's falling apart now, ironically. I did a terrible job of it because I was half drunk most days." He moved to the next vine, Elizabeth following. "She called me on it. Told me I could feel sorry for myself or I could do the work properly, but she wasn't paying for half measures. And something about the way she said it." He shook his head. "Came back the next day sober. Fixed the roof right. Then she found another job for me, and another. 6 months later, I asked her to marry me. What did she say? She said yes, but only if I promised to treat myself with the same respect I expected from others. It was a hell of a condition." He smiled, but there was pain in it. "I kept that promise for 7 good years. Then the cancer came and I had to watch her die, and there wasn't a damn thing I could do to stop it." They stood in the quiet vineyard, 2 people carrying losses that couldn't be fixed. "Your son," Nathan said. "The one who arranged the contract. You haven't mentioned him." Elizabeth felt the familiar tightness in her chest. "What's there to say? I raised him the best I could. Apparently, it wasn't enough. Or maybe he's just young and stupid, which most young men are at some point. I was." Nathan moved on to examine another vine. "Doesn't excuse what he did, but it might explain it." "Are you making excuses for him?" "No. I'm just saying that people make mistakes. The question is whether they learn from them." He straightened, met her eyes. "You've spent your whole life taking care of others, haven't you? Your son, your farm, everyone else's needs before your own. That's what mothers do." "Maybe. But it's also how you end up on an auction block with nothing." His voice was gentle but firm. "Here's what I'm offering you, Elizabeth. Not just a job but a chance to choose yourself first for once. To build something that's yours, that nobody can take away or gamble off. Does that interest you?" Elizabeth looked out at the rows of grapevines, dying and living intermingled, waiting for someone to care enough to separate them. She thought about her life, the choices made for her, the sacrifices that had gone unnoticed, the slow erosion of everything she'd built. "Yes," she said. "Yes, it does." "Good. Then let's make a deal." Nathan extended his hand, formal and businesslike. You work with me to save this vineyard. In return, at the end of 3 years, if we succeed, you become a full partner. Half ownership, equal say in all decisions. This place becomes as much yours as mine. Elizabeth stared at him. You can't be serious. I've never been more serious. I need help, Elizabeth, but more than that, I need someone who's invested in this place's future. Someone who'll fight for it the way Mary did. I think you could be that person. But you don't even know me. I know you survived 30 years of hard living and came out the other side with your dignity intact. I know you stood on that platform yesterday and didn't break even when you had every reason to. That's enough for me. His hand remained extended between them. Partnership, not charity. A choice that was really a choice. Elizabeth thought about all the times she'd been told what to do, where to go, how to be. Her father deciding she'd marry young. Her husband leaving without asking what she wanted. Thomas arranging her contract without her consent. A lifetime of other people's choices. This was different. She took Nathan Collins' hand and shook it firmly. Partners, then. But I have a condition too. Name it. If I'm going to be a partner, I want to learn everything. Not just vine management but the business side. Counting, contracts, sales. Everything it takes to run this operation. Nathan's face broke into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. Deal. Fair warning though, I'm terrible at accounting. Then it's lucky you're getting a partner who isn't. They stood in the morning sun. Two damaged people making a wild bet on a dying vineyard and each other. It was possibly the most foolish thing Elizabeth had ever done. It was also the first thing in years that felt like hope. The first week passed in a blur of hard labor and small discoveries. Elizabeth woke each morning before dawn. Her body aching from muscles she'd forgotten she had. But unlike the exhaustion she'd felt in her old life, the tiredness that came from survival, from grinding poverty, this was different. This was the earned fatigue of someone building something. Nathan proved to be a patient teacher. He showed her how to prune the vines, cutting away dead wood with clean, angled cuts that would promote new growth. He taught her to read the soil, to feel the difference between dry earth that needed water and dry earth that needed rest. He explained the delicate balance of a vineyard. Too much water and the grapes grew bland, too little and they died. Wine grapes are strange things, he said one morning as they worked side by side. They produce their best fruit when they're stressed. A little drought, rocky soil, harsh sun, that's what makes them develop complexity. But too much stress and they give up entirely. It's all about finding the line. Elizabeth thought about her own life. All the stress she'd endured, all the near breaking points. Maybe she was more like a wine grape than she'd realized. The work fell into a rhythm. Mornings were for the vines. Pruning, training the new growth, assessing damage. Afternoons were for repairs. Nathan taught Elizabeth basic carpentry, showing her how to shore up fence posts, patch the barn roof, fix broken irrigation pipes. She learned to respect his adaptations. He'd rigged pulleys in the barn to help lift heavy objects. He'd built a special bench in his workshop that allowed him to work seated but at the right height. His crutch had a padded top that he'd carved to fit his underarm perfectly. Every modification was clever, practical, born from necessity and intelligence. You know what the worst part of losing my leg was? He said one afternoon as they replaced a section of fence. Not the pain, though that was bad enough. It was everyone suddenly treating me like I was made of glass. Poor Nathan can't work anymore. Poor Nathan, better put him in an office job. Poor Nathan, maybe he should just retire. He drove a post into the ground with 3 solid strikes, compensating for his balance with unconscious shifts of his weight. Took me 2 years to realize that the only person who could define what I was capable of was me. Nobody else got a vote. Elizabeth understood that lesson intimately. She'd spent decades being told what an older woman could and couldn't do, should and shouldn't want. The auction block had been just the final expression of a judgment she'd lived with her whole life, that women like her, too old, too worn, too used up, had no value. Working in the vineyard was teaching her otherwise. They fell into an easy domestic rhythm. Nathan cooked breakfast, badly but enthusiastically. Elizabeth took over dinner, creating meals from their simple pantry that made Nathan shake his head in wonder. "How did you make dried beans taste like something worth eating?" he asked one evening. "Practice. And hunger. When you've had to make a meal out of nothing for long enough, you learn tricks." They ate on the porch as the sun set, talking about the day's work, planning tomorrow's tasks. Nathan pulled out the account books, showing Elizabeth the vineyard's finances. They were grim, barely enough money to last another year even without paying wages. "We need a harvest," Nathan said bluntly. "These numbers don't work without income." Elizabeth studied the columns. "Can the vines produce this year?" "Some of them. Maybe enough for a small batch of wine, or we could sell the grapes to one of the larger operations. It won't be much, but it might be enough to keep us going." "Then that's what we do." Nathan looked at her across the table, the lamplight casting shadows on his weathered face. "You're not worried." "I've been worried for 30 years. At least now I'm worried about something I can actually influence." He laughed at that, a genuine sound of amusement that transformed his whole face. "Mary would have liked you. You've got the same practical stubbornness." "Is that a compliment?" "The highest one I know how to give." Late one night, Elizabeth couldn't sleep. She rose quietly and stepped out onto the porch, wrapping her shawl against the desert cold. The stars overhead were brilliant, undimmed by any nearby lights. She heard the thump drag of Nathan's crutch and wasn't surprised when he joined her. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Too used to worrying. My mind doesn't know what to do when I'm not actively panicking about money or survival." "Give it time. Your brain will learn there are other things to think about." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the vineyard stretch out before them in the moonlight. The rows of posts looked like soldiers standing guard, patient and permanent. "Nathan," Elizabeth said quietly, "why did you really help me? The truth this time, not the story about returning a favor." He was quiet for a long moment. "You want to know the truth. I was tired. Tired of working this place alone. Tired of coming home to an empty house. Tired of proving every day that I could still be useful with one leg. I was starting to think maybe everyone was right. Maybe I should just sell the vineyard, move to town, accept that this part of my life was over." He shifted his weight, looking out at the vines. "Then I saw you on that platform. Saw the way you held yourself together even when those men were laughing. Saw you look your son in the eye without flinching. And I thought, if she can stand there with nothing and still have dignity, maybe I can stop feeling sorry for myself for losing a leg. Maybe there are worse things than having to use a crutch." Elizabeth felt tears prick her eyes. "So I was your inspiration. You were my wake-up call." He turned to face her. "And then, when you shook my hand and agreed to work here, I realized something else. I'd been treating this place like Mary's grave, something to tend out of obligation, to keep a promise to a dead woman. But you looked at it and saw possibility. That changed things. I might have been seeing things that aren't there. Or maybe you see things the rest of us have forgotten how to notice. Either way, I'm glad you're here, Elizabeth." "So am I," she said, and meant it with an intensity that surprised her. They stood together on the porch, two wounded people learning that healing didn't mean going back to who you were before. It meant building something new from what remained. In the vineyard, the grapevines slept and dreamed of spring. By the second week, Elizabeth's hands had developed new calluses to go with the old ones. Her back ached every morning, her shoulders screamed when she lifted her arms, and she'd never been happier. The physical work was brutal but honest. When you pruned a vine properly, it grew stronger. When you fixed a fence post, it stood firm. There was a direct line between effort and result that had been missing from so much of her life. Raising Thomas had been an act of faith with no guarantee of outcome. Surviving poverty had been a daily battle against forces she couldn't control. But here in the vineyard, her work mattered in ways she could see and measure. "You're going to hurt yourself," Nathan said one afternoon, watching her wrestle with a water barrel that probably weighed as much as she did. "I'm fine. Elizabeth, that barrel is going on that platform whether it wants to or not." She adjusted her grip, planted her feet, and lifted with her legs the way her father had taught her 50 years ago. The barrel moved an inch, then another. Slowly, stubbornly, she manhandled it up onto the platform they'd built for water storage. When she finished, breathing hard, Nathan was staring at her. "What?" "Nothing. Just, I spent 3 hours yesterday trying to move that barrel with a pulley system." "You just picked it up. Don't sound so surprised. I raised a child alone during a drought, remember? You develop certain skills." But there was something in Nathan's expression, not condescension but respect. Real respect, the kind she hadn't seen from a man in longer than she could remember. That afternoon, they worked together in the oldest section of the vineyard, where Mary's father had planted the original vines. These were the most damaged. Years of drought and neglect had left them twisted and overgrown. "We should probably pull most of these," Nathan said, running his hand over a particularly gnarled trunk. "They're so old, I doubt they'd produce decent fruit anyway." But Elizabeth saw something different. She knelt beside the vine, brushing away dead leaves and growth. Underneath, the wood was still alive, hard and twisted but vital. "Look here," she said, pointing to a small section of new growth near the base. "It's trying to come back. What if we cut away all the old growth, give it room to start fresh?" "These vines are 40 years old, Elizabeth. At that age, they're survivors. They've lasted this long through drought and neglect. Shouldn't we give them a chance?" Nathan knelt beside her, an awkward process with one leg, but he managed it. He studied the vine the way she'd taught him to study things, looking beyond the immediate damage to the potential underneath. "You might be right," he admitted. "The roots are deep. If we cut it back hard, give it intensive care, it might respond. Then let's try. The worst that happens is we're wrong and we pull them later." They worked until sunset, carefully pruning back the old vines, removing decades of chaotic growth to reveal the strong core underneath. It was surgical work, requiring judgment about what to save and what to cut away. Elizabeth found herself thinking of her own life, all the things she'd had to cut away to survive, all the dead weight of failed dreams and disappointed hopes. Maybe, like these vines, she could grow something new from old roots. That night at dinner, Nathan was quieter than usual. Elizabeth had made a stew from salt pork and dried beans, and he ate mechanically, clearly thinking about something else. "What's wrong?" she asked finally. "I've been thinking about your son, Thomas." Elizabeth's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "What about him? Have you thought about what you want to do? About whether you want to see him or—" "No." The word came out harder than she intended. "I haven't thought about it because I don't want to think about it." "Elizabeth." "He sold me, Nathan. Put me on an auction block like I was a mule or a piece of furniture. What is there to think about? Whether you can forgive him." Elizabeth set down her spoon with careful control. "Is that what you think I should do? Forgive him?" "I think," Nathan said slowly, "that carrying anger around is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. I also think that you're a mother, and that doesn't stop just because your child disappoints you. You don't have children. You don't understand." "You're right. You don't. But I was someone's child once, and I disappointed them plenty. My father never forgave me for losing my leg. Said it was carelessness, said I wasn't paying attention. He died while I was still trying to earn back his respect." Nathan looked at his plate. "I'd give a lot to have the chance to hear him say he was wrong." Elizabeth felt tears burning behind her eyes. "It's not the same." "Maybe not. But I've watched you these past 2 weeks, and you know what I've noticed? You're carrying Thomas with you everywhere. Every time you push yourself too hard, every time you flinch when someone raises their voice, every time you look surprised when I treat you with basic respect. He's still selling you, Elizabeth. He's still on that auction block with you. The only difference is now you're the one keeping you there." The truth of his words hit like a physical blow. Elizabeth stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. "I need air." "Elizabeth, I'm not angry at you. I need air." She walked out into the vineyard, moving between the rows of vines they'd worked so hard to save. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called out to its pack. Nathan was right, damn him. She was carrying Thomas everywhere, letting his betrayal define her. Every time she pushed herself too hard, she was trying to prove she'd been worth more than $5. Every time she looked for criticism in Nathan's words, she was still hearing the laughter of that crowd. She'd left the auction block, but she hadn't left what it had done to her. Elizabeth knelt in the dirt between two rows of vines, the old ones they'd pruned that afternoon. In the moonlight, they looked skeletal, stripped down to their essential forms. But at their base, those small green shoots were already beginning to grow. New life from old roots. "I don't know how to forgive him," she whispered to the vines, to the desert night, to herself. "I don't know how to let go of what he did." The vines had no answer. But they kept growing anyway, pushing new shoots up toward the sky despite 40 years of drought and neglect. They didn't know how to give up. They only knew how to survive and, when given the chance, to grow. Maybe that was enough. Maybe you didn't need to know how to forgive. Maybe you just needed to keep growing anyway. Nathan came up behind her slowly, giving her time to tell him to leave if she wanted. When she didn't, he sat down on the ground beside her. Another awkward maneuver that he accomplished with practiced ease. "I'm sorry," he said. "That wasn't my place." "No, you were right. I just didn't want to hear it." She wiped her eyes. "He's my son, Nathan. I gave everything I had to raise him, and it still wasn't enough. What does that say about me? It says you're human. It says you did your best in circumstances that would have broken most people. It doesn't say anything about your worth. Then why do I feel worthless? Because someone you loved made you feel that way. Because a crowd of strangers confirmed it. Because you've been taught your whole life that women like you, too old, too poor, too worn down, don't matter." He picked up a handful of soil, let it run through his fingers. "But here's what I see. A woman who survived 30 years of poverty and loss. Who stood on an auction block and didn't break. Who's been working herself to the bone for 2 weeks and hasn't complained once. Who looked at dying vines and saw possibility. That woman isn't worthless, Elizabeth. She's extraordinary." Elizabeth let out a shaky laugh. "You barely know me. I know enough. And I'll tell you something else. Your son will probably realize what he lost eventually. Maybe soon, maybe years from now. But one day he'll look around and understand that he had something precious and he threw it away. And that realization will hurt him more than anything you could say or do to him now." "You sound very sure of that." "I am. Because I've been him. Not the same situation but the same lesson. I spent 5 years being angry at the world for taking my leg, pushing away everyone who tried to help, including Mary. She almost gave up on me. And when I finally came to my senses, I had to live with knowing I'd wasted 5 years of the short time we had together. That knowledge still wakes me up some nights." He struggled to his feet, offered her a hand up. "So yes, maybe someday you'll forgive Thomas. Maybe you won't. But either way, you need to stop letting him define your worth. You need to choose yourself the way you chose to come here. Can you do that?" Elizabeth took his hand, let him pull her to her feet. In the moonlight, scarred and limping and steady, Nathan Collins looked like the most solid thing in the world. "I can try," she said. "That's all any of us can do." They walked back to the house together, two damaged people learning that strength wasn't about never breaking. It was about what you built from the pieces afterward. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Elizabeth had come to the vineyard. She was working in the north section, training new vine growth onto the trellises, when she heard horses approaching. 2 men on horseback, well dressed in the way that marked them as someone else's muscle rather than their own master's. Elizabeth straightened, her hand automatically going to the pruning knife at her belt. Years of living alone had taught her to be cautious around unfamiliar men. "Help you gentlemen," she called out. The lead rider, a heavy-set man with a beard that couldn't hide the meanness in his face, looked her over with dismissive eyes. "We're looking for Nathan Collins. He's in the barn. I'll fetch him. Don't bother. We'll find him ourselves." They rode past her without waiting for permission, and Elizabeth felt her hackles rise. She followed at a distance, watching as they dismounted at the barn. The trouble arrived on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Elizabeth had come to the vineyard. She was working in the north section, training new vine growth onto the trellises, when she heard horses approaching. 2 men on horseback, well dressed in the way that marked them as someone else's muscle rather than their own master's. Elizabeth straightened, her hand automatically going to the pruning knife at her belt. Years of living alone had taught her to be cautious around unfamiliar men. "Help you gentlemen," she called out. The lead rider, a heavy-set man with a beard that couldn't hide the meanness in his face, looked her over with dismissive eyes. "We're looking for Nathan Collins. He's in the barn. I'll fetch him. Don't bother. We'll find him ourselves." They rode past her without waiting for permission, and Elizabeth felt her hackles rise. She followed at a distance, watching as they dismounted at the barn. When they were gone, Nathan lowered his crutch, but Elizabeth could see his hands shaking slightly. Adrenaline, anger, or both. "You okay?" she asked. "I should be asking you that. What Garrett said wasn't anything I haven't heard before. But thank you for standing up for me." Nathan shook his head. "I should have handled that better. Should have stayed calm. You handled it fine. But Nathan, who's Brennan? And why does he want this property?" Over coffee at the kitchen table, Nathan explained. Silas Brennan had come to California 15 years ago with railroad money and political connections. He'd bought up land during the droughts, waited for desperate families to sell cheap, and consolidated his holdings into a massive agricultural empire. He owned ranches, orchards, vineyards, even some of the town businesses. "He's been after this property for 3 years, Nathan said. Made Mary an offer a month before she died. She told him where he could stick it. And now he's trying again. He thinks I'm desperate. Hell, maybe I am. 20,000 would clear my debts, set me up comfortably for whatever's left of my life." Elizabeth studied his face. "But you're not going to take it." "No. This land. It's all I have left of Mary. And more than that, it's ours now. Yours and mine. I'm not giving it up to some land grabber who only wants it so he can own the whole valley. Even if he tries to force you. Even then. Though I'll admit, I'm not sure what he might try next. Brennan doesn't take no for an answer, and he's not above bending the law to get what he wants." Elizabeth thought about Garrett and Simmons, about the casual cruelty in their eyes. Men like that didn't make idle threats. "Then we need to be smart," she said. "And we need to be prepared." Over the next few days, Elizabeth threw herself into understanding the legal side of their situation. Nathan's land deed was solid, paid in full, no liens, completely legal. But she'd lived through enough legal battles with her own property to know that legality didn't always matter when someone with money and connections wanted what you had. She made Nathan take her to town, to the county clerk's office. The clerk, a nervous man named Patterson, confirmed what she suspected. Brennan had been buying up water rights throughout the valley. "He doesn't own your spring," Patterson said, "but he owns the rights to the creek that feeds into it. Could make things difficult if he decided to divert the water upstream." "That's illegal," Nathan protested. "Sure. But by the time you proved it and got a court order, your vines could be dead. Just saying, you might want to be careful." On the ride back to the vineyard, Nathan was quiet. Elizabeth could see him working through scenarios, none of them good. "We need a backup water supply," she said finally. "If he controls the creek, we need another source. There isn't one. The spring is fed by the creek. Without that, what about a well?" Nathan shook his head. Would cost money we don't have, and there's no guarantee we'd hit water. The aquifer here is deep and unpredictable. Elizabeth thought about the vines they'd worked so hard to save, the partnership they'd built, the future they were trying to create. She thought about men like Garrett and Brennan, who saw the world as something to own and control. Then we'll find another way, she said firmly. We didn't survive this long just to give up to some bully with money. Nathan looked at her, and something shifted in his expression, surprise giving way to admiration. You know what? Believe you. Hell, if anyone can find a way, it's you. Damn right, Elizabeth said. But as they drove back toward the vineyard, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Men like Brennan didn't give up after one refusal. They escalated. And she had a sinking feeling they'd see that escalation soon. Elizabeth woke to the sound of something wrong. She lay still in the darkness, listening. There it was again, a scraping sound from outside, metal on wood. She rose quickly, pulling her shawl around her shoulders, and stepped into the main room. Nathan was already up, standing by the window with his rifle, peering out into the darkness. Stay back, he whispered. What is it? Someone's in the barn. They moved outside together despite Nathan's protests. The moon was a sliver, giving almost no light. Elizabeth grabbed a lantern, but Nathan stopped her from lighting it. No light. We don't want them to know we're coming. They moved across the yard, Nathan's crutch barely making a sound despite the uneven ground. The barn door stood open. Wrong, because Nathan always closed it at night to keep out coyotes and foxes. Inside they heard it clearly now. The sound of someone breathing hard, the rustle of hay, a small whimper of fear. Nathan raised the rifle. Come out. Now. Oz. Then. Please don't shoot. Please. I didn't take anything, I swear. The voice was young. Female. Terrified. Elizabeth lit the lantern. Huddled in the corner of the barn, partially buried in hay, was a girl. 14, maybe 15 years old, wearing a torn dress that had once been fine but was now filthy and stained. Her face was bruised, one eye swollen shut. Her hands shook as she held them up in surrender. Please, she said again. I'll leave. Just don't send me back. Please don't send me back. Elizabeth felt something crack open in her chest. She'd seen that look before. Pure terror, the kind that came from being hurt by someone who was supposed to protect you. She handed the lantern to Nathan and knelt slowly, making herself small and unthreatening. It's okay. Nobody's going to hurt you. What's your name? The girl stared at her, clearly trying to decide if this was a trap. Mary, she said finally. Mary Brennan. Nathan sucked in a breath. Brennan. As in Silas Brennan. The girl flinched. He's my uncle. Please, please don't tell him I'm here. He'll kill me this time. I know he will. They brought her inside, despite Nathan's obvious reservations. Elizabeth heated water, found clean cloths, and gently cleaned the blood from the girl's face. The injuries were bad. The black eye, split lip, bruises on her arms in the distinctive pattern of finger marks. How long has this been going on? Elizabeth asked softly. Since my parents died. 2 years. Mary's voice was flat, emotionless. The tone of someone who'd learned that feeling was too dangerous. I'm supposed to be grateful. Uncle Silas took me in, gave me a home. In return, I just have to be obedient. She said the word obedient like it tasted of poison. What happened tonight? Nathan asked. He brought home business associates. Told me to entertain them. Mary looked up, and there was steel under the fear in her eyes. I knew what that meant. So I ran. Elizabeth felt fury burning in her chest, hot and righteous. This child, because she was still a child, had been treated like property by the same man who wanted to steal their vineyard. The same man who sent thugs to intimidate them. You're safe here, she said firmly. For tonight at least you're safe. They sat at the kitchen table. Elizabeth, Nathan, and Mary. The girl drank coffee with shaking hands, pulling the blanket Elizabeth had given her tighter around her shoulders. He'll come looking for me, she said. He always does when I run. You've run before? Nathan asked. 3 times. Once I made it all the way to Sacramento. He found me, brought me back, locked me in my room for a month. She touched her swollen eye. This is what happens when I disappoint him. Elizabeth wanted to find Silas Brennan and show him exactly what happened when someone hurt a child. But that wouldn't help Mary. What would help was having a plan. We need to think this through, Nathan said, though Elizabeth could see the anger in his clenched jaw. If we keep her, Brennan will use it against us. He could claim we kidnapped her, have us arrested. So we just send her back to be abused. Elizabeth snapped. No. But we need to be smart. We need to protect her, Elizabeth interrupted. That's what we need to do. Figure out the rest later. Mary watched this exchange with wide eyes, like she couldn't quite believe someone was arguing about keeping her safe rather than the trouble she'd caused. Why? She asked quietly. Why would you risk so much for me? You don't even know me. Elizabeth reached across the table, took the girl's hand gently. Because everybody deserves to be protected. Because you're a child who's been hurt by an adult who should have cared for you. Because it's the right thing to do. She looked at Nathan. Isn't it? Nathan ran his hand through his hair, clearly warring with himself. Finally he nodded. It is. Though I'll point out that we're about to make an enemy who already wanted our land and now has a legitimate reason to destroy us. He already wanted to destroy us, Elizabeth said. At least now we'll feel good about opposing him. Despite everything, Mary smiled. It transformed her face, showed the girl she could have been if the world had been kinder. Thank you, she whispered. They gave Mary the small storage room, cleaned it out and set up a cot. It wasn't much, but it had a door that locked from the inside, and Elizabeth could see the relief on the girl's face when she realized she'd have privacy and security. Over the next few days, Mary proved herself surprisingly capable. She'd been raised in luxury but adapted to farm work quickly, helping with cooking, mending, lighter vineyard tasks. She was quiet, watchful, jumping at sudden noises, but Elizabeth could see her slowly relaxing. On the 4th evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Mary said quietly, "You remind me of my mother." Elizabeth felt her heart squeeze. What was she like? Strong. Like you. She didn't take nonsense from anyone, including my father. Mary smiled at the memory. She used to say that being a woman meant having to be twice as smart and 3 times as tough, because the world wouldn't give you credit for either. She sounds wise. She was. When she and my father died in the fire, Uncle Silas said he'd take care of me. I thought he'd be like her. But he wasn't. Mary's voice dropped. He said I should be grateful. That girls like me, orphans with no prospects, should take what they could get and not complain. Elizabeth recognized that tone, that message. The same one she'd heard her whole life. You should be grateful for whatever scraps you're given. You should accept being treated as less than human and call it kindness. Your uncle is wrong, Elizabeth said firmly. You're not an orphan with no prospects. You're a young woman with your whole life ahead of you. And you deserve respect, safety, and the chance to decide your own future. Mary looked at her with shining eyes. Do you really believe that? I do. And more than that, I'm going to make sure you get it. The rider came at sunset on the 7th day. He was young, maybe 20, wearing a deputy's badge but looking uncomfortable in it. He dismounted carefully, keeping his hand away from his gun. Mr. Collins. Ma'am. I'm Deputy Warren. I need to speak with you about Mary Brennan. Elizabeth felt her stomach drop, but Nathan stepped forward calmly. What about her? Mr. Brennan has filed a report claiming she's been kidnapped. Says she's simple-minded, likely to wander off and get hurt. He's very worried about her. That's a lie, Mary said, appearing in the doorway. I ran away because he beats me. Look. She pulled back her sleeve, showing the bruises that were fading from purple to yellow. This is what happens when I disappoint him. Deputy Warren looked uncomfortable. Miss Brennan, your uncle says you're prone to making up stories. Of course he does. That's what abusers always say. Mary's voice was steady now, stronger than Elizabeth had heard it. Deputy, I'm 14 years old. I'm telling you that my uncle abuses me. Are you going to help me or not? The deputy looked between Mary, Nathan, and Elizabeth. Elizabeth could see him weighing the situation, Brennan's power and money against a girl's bruises and desperate eyes. I'll need to file a report, he said finally. Document those injuries, take a statement. If what you're saying is true, it is true, then there'll be an investigation. But Miss Brennan, you understand that for now, legally, your uncle is your guardian. I can't just let you stay here without his consent. Then get a judge involved, Nathan said. File for emergency guardianship, whatever it takes. But that girl doesn't go back to Brennan's house. Not tonight, not any night. Deputy Warren looked at Nathan with new respect. You understand what you're taking on. Brennan won't let this go. I'm counting on it. The hearing took place 2 weeks later in the county courthouse, a building that smelled of old wood and older corruption. Silas Brennan sat at the plaintiff's table, the picture of respectability in an expensive suit. He was a large man, running to fat but still powerful, with silver hair and the kind of smile that politicians practiced in mirrors. His lawyer was even more expensive looking. At the defendant's table sat Nathan, Elizabeth, Mary, and a young lawyer named Thomas Chen who'd taken their case pro bono after seeing Mary's injuries. This is absurd, Brennan's lawyer began. My client is a pillar of this community, a devoted family man who took in his orphan niece out of Christian charity. And now these people, a crippled farmer and some woman he picked up from a contract auction, presume to make accusations of abuse with no evidence beyond the word of a troubled, fanciful young girl. Elizabeth felt Nathan tense beside her. She put a hand on his arm, steady. The evidence, Thomas Chen said quietly, speaks for itself. He produced photographs of Mary's bruises, testimony from the doctor who'd examined her, statements from neighbors who'd heard screams from Brennan's house. The judge, a weary-looking man named Holloway, reviewed the materials with a frown. Mr. Brennan, these are serious allegations. Your Honor, my niece is troubled. She tells stories, acts out for attention. Those bruises. She fell down the stairs. I've had to discipline her, yes, but only as any guardian would. You beat me, Mary said, standing up despite Thomas Chen's attempt to stop her. You beat me, and you locked me in my room, and you told those men they could. That's enough, Judge Holloway said, but not unkindly. Miss Brennan, please sit down. No. Mary's voice shook but didn't break. You're all going to sit here and decide my future like I'm property, just like everyone always has. But I'm not property. I'm a person, and I'm telling you what happened to me. My uncle beat me. He threatened me. And he was going to let his business associates assault me. That's why I ran. The courtroom had gone silent. Elizabeth felt tears on her cheeks but didn't wipe them away. Judge Holloway leaned forward. Miss Brennan, are you willing to testify under oath to these accusations? Yes. You understand that if you're lying, there will be consequences? I'm not lying. And I'll testify, swear on any Bible you want, say it in front of God and everyone. My uncle is a monster, and I will not go back to his house. The judge ruled 3 days later. Emergency guardianship was granted to Nathan Collins, with Elizabeth Morgan named as co-guardian. Mary would remain in their custody pending a full investigation into the abuse allegations. Brennan was prohibited from contacting Mary directly and faced potential criminal charges. Standing on the courthouse steps, Elizabeth watched Brennan emerge with his lawyer. He looked at them across the plaza, and his expression was pure cold hatred. This isn't over, he said quietly. Then he turned and walked away. He's right, Nathan said. He's going to come after us with everything he has. Let him try, Elizabeth said. But the attacks, when they came, were more subtle than Elizabeth expected. First, the bank suddenly called in a loan Nathan had taken out years ago, one that wasn't due for another 3 years. The banker, apologetic but firm, explained that new regulations required immediate payment. The fact that Brennan was on the bank's board wasn't mentioned, but everyone understood. Then suppliers started refusing to deliver to the Vineyard. No explanation, just sudden unavailability of everything from seed to tools to basic supplies. Local laborers who'd expressed interest in harvest work suddenly found other jobs. The merchants in town became cold, distant. Even the church, where Nathan and Mary had been attending, made it clear their presence was causing discomfort for other parishioners. "He's trying to isolate us," Nathan said one evening as they tallied their dwindling resources. "If he can't take the land legally, he'll starve us out. Then we'll find another way," Elizabeth said, though even she was starting to feel the pressure. The solution came from an unexpected source. Mary, working in the vineyard, noticed that the healthiest vines were in a section where water naturally pooled during rains. She brought Nathan and Elizabeth to see it. "What if we're thinking about water wrong?" she said. "Everyone focuses on the creek and the spring. But what about rainwater? If we could capture it, store it?" Nathan looked at the land with new eyes. "Cisterns. We could build cisterns, collect every drop of rain that falls on the property." "It would take time," Elizabeth said. "And money we don't have. But we have labor. And we have time until the rainy season starts." Nathan was already sketching in the dirt with a stick. "If we dig in the right spots, use gravity to channel water where we need it, it could work." They worked for 6 weeks, digging, building, channeling. It was brutal labor. Elizabeth's back screamed. Nathan pushed himself beyond what his leg could comfortably handle, and Mary worked until her hands bled. But slowly a system emerged. Rock-lined cisterns at strategic points on the property. Channels carved to direct rainwater. A backup system independent of the creek Brennan controlled. The first test came in early November when a storm rolled through. Not much, just a few hours of steady rain. But by morning, their cisterns held water. Not enough to survive a whole season, but enough to prove the concept worked. "We did it," Mary said, staring at the largest cistern in wonder. "We actually did it." Nathan put his arm around her shoulders. "We did. And you know what that means." "What?" "It means Brennan doesn't control us anymore. He can cut off the creek, but we'll survive. We've built something he can't touch." That night, as they sat on the porch, Elizabeth, Nathan, and Mary, watching the stars come out, Elizabeth felt something she hadn't felt in years. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. Their situation was still precarious. Brennan was still a threat, and they had no guarantee the vineyard would produce enough to sustain them. But they had each other. They had built something together. And that was more than she'd had in decades. "Elizabeth," Mary said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Taking me in, everything it's cost you?" Elizabeth looked at this girl who'd become like a daughter to her. Strong, brave, growing more confident every day. "Not for a second. You gave us something to fight for beyond just survival. You gave us a family." "Is that what we are?" Mary asked. "A family," Nathan answered before Elizabeth could. "That's exactly what we are. Not the family any of us expected or planned for, but a family all the same." They sat in comfortable silence. 3 people who'd all been thrown away by the world in different ways, who'd found each other and built something new. Elizabeth thought about her son, about the life she'd left behind, about all the ways she'd been told she was worthless. And she realized, she'd never been worthless. She'd just been in a place where her worth couldn't be seen. Here, in this struggling vineyard with these wounded people, she was exactly where she needed to be. 2 years later, the vineyard bloomed. Elizabeth stood at the edge of the property, watching workers move through the rows of vines. 6 of them now, hired with money from their first successful harvest. The vines they'd saved were producing fruit that made winemakers sit up and take notice. Those old, gnarled plants, cut back and given intensive care, had responded with grapes of remarkable complexity. "Stress makes the best grapes," Nathan had said, and he'd been right. The stone house had been expanded. A new room for Mary, a proper office for managing the business, a barn that stood straight and proud. The cistern system had been refined and now provided all the water they needed, independent of Brennan's control. Silas Brennan himself had been surprisingly quiet. The investigation into Mary's abuse had ended without criminal charges. Money and connections had seen to that, but the scandal had damaged his reputation. He'd sold off some holdings and mostly stayed out of sight. Occasionally, Elizabeth would see one of his men watching the vineyard from a distance, but they never approached. Mary, now 16, was helping manage the books. She'd proven to have a head for business that neither Nathan nor Elizabeth possessed. She talked about going to college someday, studying agriculture or business. Elizabeth had no doubt she would. Nathan emerged from the barn, moving with the same limp drag rhythm but with more confidence, more ease. They'd been partners for 2 years now, and the partnership had deepened into something more. Not romantic love exactly, but something equally powerful. Companionship, trust, a bone-deep understanding. "We got an order from a restaurant in San Francisco," he said, waving a letter. "Wants 30 cases of our wine. Can you believe that? San Francisco." Elizabeth smiled. "I can believe it. Those old vines know what they're doing." A wagon appeared on the road leading to the vineyard. As it got closer, Elizabeth's smile faded. She recognized the driver. Her son had aged in 2 years. He was thinner, his face showing lines that hadn't been there before. He climbed down from the wagon slowly, like a man expecting to be told to leave. "Mama," he said. Just that one word. Elizabeth felt Nathan tense beside her, protective. She put a hand on his arm. "It's okay. Thomas." They stood 10 feet apart, mother and son, separated by 2 years and one unforgivable act. "I came to..." Thomas started, then stopped. Started again. "I came to say I'm sorry. I know it's too late, I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it. What I did was unforgivable." "Yes, it was," Elizabeth said. No softening, no easy comfort. Just truth. "I lost everything after that. The gambling debts, they destroyed me. I've been working as a ranch hand, barely surviving. And every day I thought about what I did to you. How I treated you like property." His voice cracked. "You gave me everything, and I threw it away for cards and cowardice." "Yes, you did," Elizabeth agreed. Thomas looked at her, and she could see him hoping for something. Forgiveness, redemption, a way back to what they'd had. But some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired. They could only be acknowledged and learned from. "I don't expect you to forgive me," Thomas said. "I don't even think you should. I just wanted you to know that I understand what I did. And that seeing you here, seeing you've built something good, it makes me happy. Even though I have no right to that happiness." Elizabeth studied her son. He was sincere, she could see that. The boy who'd sold her was gone, replaced by a man who understood consequences. But forgiveness wasn't something she could give yet. Maybe not ever. "I appreciate you saying that, Thomas. But I'm not ready to have you in my life. Maybe someday, maybe not. For now, I need you to respect that." He nodded, understanding. "I will. But Mama, if you ever need anything at all, I'm working at the Johnson Ranch, about 20 miles east. I'll do whatever you need. No expectations, no demands. Just, if you need help." "I'll remember that." Thomas climbed back into his wagon. Before he left, he looked at Nathan and Mary, who'd come to stand beside Elizabeth. "Take care of her," he said. "She deserves people who will." "We know," Nathan said simply. They watched the wagon disappear down the road. "Are you okay?" Mary asked Elizabeth quietly. "I am." And surprisingly, it was true. Seeing Thomas, hearing his apology, it didn't change what had happened, but it closed something. A door she'd been holding open despite the pain it caused. "He might come back," Nathan said. "Maybe." And maybe someday I'll be ready for that. But not today. Elizabeth turned back toward the vineyard, toward the life she'd built from nothing. Today I have work to do. That night, as they did most evenings, the three of them sat on the porch. The sun set over the valley, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. The grapevines rustled in the breeze, heavy with fruit that would be harvested next week. Elizabeth thought about her life. All the years of struggle, the auction block, the moment Nathan had torn up that contract. She thought about Mary, about the family they'd built, about partnership and choice and dignity. "You know what I realized today," she said. "What's that?" Nathan asked. "I spent my whole life thinking it was too late. Too late to change, too late to start over, too late to matter. But it's never too late. Not as long as you're still breathing." Mary leaned her head on Elizabeth's shoulder. "I'm glad you found that out." "Me too, sweetheart. Me too." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out. Three people who'd all been told they were worthless, who'd found each other and proved the world wrong. The vineyard stretched out before them, proof that even the oldest, most damaged vines could produce something extraordinary if given the chance. Elizabeth Morgan was 58 years old. She was a partner in a successful vineyard, guardian to a brilliant young woman, and friend to a good man. She'd been broken, discarded, and written off as worthless. And she had never been happier. The desert had tried to kill her. Instead, it had given her grace.